Good morning, everyone. Nice to see a lot of familiar names. Welcome back to our series of trainings that we've been on this journey together for a few months already. So as you all know, my name is Daisy Gomez, and it's always a pleasure to be part of your Baby Friday morning. And I am, honored that you would log in and spend your morning with us. So before we begin, I just want to, let you all know that this space is for you. I am here, to be of service to you. So please feel comfortable, have your screen on or off, whatever makes you feel more comfortable. If you want to take notes, go ahead. Make sure you have your water, tea, coffee, whatever you need to stay replenished, and have a space where you can truly engage and be part of this presentation with us all. Today, with some of our formal learning objectives, we are going to discuss the significance of trauma-informed practice with children who have experienced trauma. We will define types of trauma and their impact on children. We will analyze the benefits of enhancing our sensitive communication skills. And a lot of this information might be things that you already know. They might be refreshers to concepts that you might have heard, before. And my hope is that this just adds and enhances your understanding and supports your well-being and the well-being of those children and youth that you have in your lives. Today, we will be using the chat window, as I see all of you are very accustomed to now. And we will also have a breakout room where we can just, be in a space of a little more intimacy, where we can gather our thoughts and share them with one another. And I see that a lot of you have already introduced yourselves. So thank you very much for that. So I will skip this part, as we have already shared many of who we are. And one of the reasons why I like to add, where are you zooming in from, because it is truly such a surprise when we see how much we're able to do from, I'm, transporting live to you from my bedroom. So sometimes, it's really fun to see where we all make it happen. So thank you all for just joining, and thank you for the introductions. And thank you for all of you who are back at work and are still, finding time to join, Zoom presentations. So we're going to get right into it, because what always happens is that we, lose track of time because we're having so much fun, and I end up rushing to get towards the end. So today we're just going to jump right in and talk about what is trauma resilience informed care. I know that this concept might be something that you have heard. It might be something, that is very popular to talk about, but sometimes we kind of get stuck when we say, so what is it? How do we do it? If you recall the presentation from last month, we went through the pillars, the principles of trauma-informed care. We kind of talked about them and we flushed them out a little bit in terms of what are some of the everyday actions that we can take to incorporate the pillars. And if you remember, we talked about safety, collaboration, building trust, building connection, and all of that really being part of this strength-based approach. And all of those things are very good to keep in mind, because when we fall back on those foundations, we can really truly activate our actions based on something that is trauma resilience informed. So today I'm just going to provide you a recap of what that means in concrete steps. And what it means is that we are trying to break the cycle of that condition question that we all sometimes have. And what is wrong with this person? Before, in the olden days when I used to drive to you for a presentation, I would have to zoom in and out of traffic lanes and in and out of different freeways. And sometimes, it was very often that in the morning traffic, I would have, individuals cut me off or, race somewhere to get in the lane. And the first initial thought would be like, what's wrong with them? But in really being mindful of having this perspective shift in our thoughts, you know, the step, the next step would be what could be happening. So whenever that would happen to me, I would have to consider maybe they're rushing to care for someone. Maybe they're on their way to the hospital because they're having a baby or one of their loved ones is hurt. So I had to really implement that step of what could be happening for this person that would make their behavior completely or understandable. And when we're working with people more intently, more personally, especially when we're working with children, we really want to emphasize and be intentional about this third step, which is what strengths can we build upon? What are some of the things that have really been adaptable skills that have helped this young person get to where they are and still maintain a sense of self? We have to ask, what is strong in you? So replacing the what is wrong with you with what is strong in you. And I can tell you that when you take this approach, not just with those that are facing outwards, but also when you face inward. If you know me and have been part of many of my trainings, you know that I will always, always reiterate how important it is to take care of self. Because if you can't do for yourself, we really can't do for anyone else. So let's keep this in mind when we continue throughout the presentation. And if you have any comments, please feel free to put them in the chat, and I will do my best to address them as we go by. So why? Why do we need to be trauma informed and resilience informed when we're working with children in the foster system, or children, or just human beings, right? We have to be, intentional about being trauma and resilience informed, because we know that every single child, every single person is coming to us from lived experiences. And more than likely, children in the foster system have been through repeated traumatizing events or events that have caused significant changes in their lives. And we have to keep that in mind. We have to remember that just as we are narrators of our book and our stories, everyone carries with them things from the past. Everything that has happened to us before, we carry with us as in this imaginary backpack, this imaginary containment that has a lot of good, bad, and ambiguous. And that approach, that mentality, that perspective can really help us be more respectfully curious when we encounter certain, signs and symptoms of things that might not be clearly understood at the moment. And we have to remember that, trauma affects a child's behavior, the way they relate to people, their view of the world, and their view of themselves in the world. So that's why we think that it's very important that just as a human being, we really try to be intentional and having this mindset that everyone has something to offer, but sometimes it can be really fuzzy and cluttered because of the things that we carry with us, throughout the span of our lifetime. And we have to remember that the impact of trauma is widespread. That means that a child's trauma affects us too. As compassionate, loving human beings, especially working in a system that, here in LA County, the child welfare system is burdened by so much need. So therefore, when we encounter so many cases, so many children that are in need and truly suffering, it takes a toll on us, because we too have, maybe past hurts. Maybe we have our own childhood traumas, or just people in our lives that have gone through something similarly. And being part of this system that continues to try to advocate and support those that are most in need can create this sense of compassion fatigue. And compassion fatigue is really a condition that, even though we are truly loving, caring human beings, it comes to a point that if we don't address, what is needed within us, we can really be incapable of having that compassion. That's why compassion fatigue is one of those terms that, again, you might hear and you might in a way understand, but when you feel it, it is very real. And sometimes it's this I've heard it characterized as a sense of funk. It's kind of like a stuckness where you're like, I want to care, I just can't, or I just feel hopeless. So that, to overcome some of these very real, very debilitating conditions, we have to remember that we have to provide support to self, and we have to be very intentional in being, respectfully curious when working with children. And I will get to it a little later, but one of the things I truly have learned with working with children and youth in systems is that we as caregivers, as providers, as the adults, we are not ever in a child's life to fix. There is no fixing, because we as people, we're not broken. We have just gone through something and we just need a little space to really heal. So when we are in people's lives, we really want to be intentional of providing that space, of providing that relationship building that can allow this person to find their path towards healing. And remember that, the effects of this trauma, whether it's, the child's signs and symptoms of past trauma, or our own characterization of the trauma that's being, that's affecting us, it can really disrupt relationships. That's why it's so important that we, are intentional about the foundations of what is, that maintaining of our well-being, and also model well-being. So being aware of the impact of trauma in children allows us to communicate effectively. And again, when we are communicating, we're not communicating to fix or to make something, that has been ruptured put together. We are there to listen for understanding, and that will allow us to be more effective in our communication. And also by allowing the space where a child can truly be themselves, improves a child's behavior. It allows for that exploration of self without shame, without I need to. It really provides that safety that we discussed prior, about building that not just physical safety, but that emotional safety, where a child can truly trust and say, I can trust you with my feelings. And then we are able to respond appropriately to the child's needs when we understand that some of the impact or some of the signs and symptoms that have been brought upon because of trauma have nothing to do with us. Therefore, it allows us to come from a place of kindness and a place of caring, while still allowing ourselves and the child the space to truly find out what is the true healing and what is the true needs that need to be shared, discussed, and addressed. And And we also want to be knowledge, we have to allow ourselves with being aware to reduce the risk of our own compassion fatigue and our own secondary traumatization. And that is when we are at our limits, we might say something, react. Our body language says so much to children, because children, even though they might not say much or might not seem to be very engaged, they're looking, they're paying attention. And paying attention, especially to body language, what is not said, has been one of the adaptable skills, one of the adaptable coping mechanisms that a lot of children have used to survive the many different challenges that they've encountered. So, let's be mindful of that, because we often fall into those traps, into those mental traps, those cognitive distortions that, as caregivers, as providers, working with children who have experienced trauma, we often fall into these mental traps that are true myths, but they're myths that can potentially harm our sense of self. It can harm the passion that we have to make a difference in the lives of children. And it can also disrupt the relationship. So here are just some of the most common myths that we experience when working with children who have experienced trauma. For example, my love should be enough to erase the effects of everything bad that has happened before. This is a very easy trap to fall into, because we want to believe that. We want to be able to just have a clean slate. But again, remember that we all carry this invisible backpack, this invisible armor that has been placed there by many, many experiences. And it's very difficult to peel off layers when they have been cemented in our body, in our brain, and in our soul. That's why some harms are very difficult to heal, but it is possible. Another myth: my child should be grateful and love me as much as I love them. Love, if you are a poet at heart, like many of us are, you know that love means many different things for many different people, based on your culture, based on what you have been taught. So let's be mindful that love looks different. And one of the things that we can, do for ourselves, for our sake, for our heart's sake, and for the sake of the children in our lives, is that let's, in that space of safety, let's open it up so that we can not only just learn about their love language, but also talk about love language as a factor that is very important in building bonds and building relationships. We all have a different love language. My child should love or feel loyal. My child shouldn't love or feel loyal to an abusive parent. If you have been working with children for a short time, a long time, again, that love is complicated. That sometimes it's very difficult to understand how a child can still love a parent that was abusive. But remember that relationships, remember that we adapt. We, as humans, children especially, are so resilient that they adapt to their normal. And if abuse was part of their normal, they see it through the eyes of, this is my parent, and sometimes this happens, but this is my parent, which is very difficult to sometimes understand from a perspective of, of an outside view of how can you love someone that hurt you. But we understand that, again, love is complicated. And when it comes to a child's feelings, or anyone's feelings, there is no right or wrong. It is what it is, and our feelings are very difficult to understand, but they're to be accepted and understood as much as we can. Another myth to avoid is it's better to just move on, forget, and not talk about past painful experiences. And this one is something that maybe a lot of us can relate to, because talking about some of the experiences that some of the children in our lives have gone through is so very painful for us. But remember that it's not about us when it comes to children. And providing that space, and if children step into that space with that sense of wanting to talk about their past, or being curious about, you know, what has happened to them, it's important that we be there and we be present, and that we acknowledge that it's okay to feel. And these feelings are like waves. They will come and they will go, and none of them stay forever. And, you know, but having this myth in mind that it is better to just move on can be very harmful for us and for the children in our lives. And I know those are just some of the very many common myths that, you know, I have heard throughout time, and we have acknowledged with, you know, individuals. But I would like to hear, what are some of the other harmful myths that, you know, might come across in your circles, in your networks, or sometimes in our own minds?
They're too young to understand.
They're too young to understand. Thank you. Exactly. Sometimes we really, you know, we really think that children might not understand what's going on, or but trust me, children find a way to make interpretations. And having that space to talk about it can definitely allow for a corrective understanding. Thank you.
Yeah.
This is an adult problem. Yes, yes. Very, very, yes. Very often we want to shelter the children from some of the, you know, painful things that are happening in their lives. And yes, we blind ourselves from thinking that they um might not be attuned to what's going on, or might have their own thoughts and beliefs and comments to add to what's going on. um Memories may take time to surface. Mm-hmm. It didn't happen directly to you. You shouldn't be affected. Oh yeah. And you know, that's a big one, Destiny, because sometimes we forget the impact of that secondary trauma, and it is very real. And if you have been a first responder, if you have ever been there for someone in need, you know that it affects you as well. They were just babies when it happened, so they can't remember. I think I've shared the recommendation of this book before, but there is a book, The Body Keeps Score. And you know, memories are one thing, but our body remembers. This has happened to me and I got over it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, when we have similar experiences, it could be very tempting for us to go there and have that thought. But remember that every single individual is unique, and every way in which they experience life is unique. So the same thing can happen to two people at the same time, and their experiences can be completely different. The way in which they interpret it and the way in which they were affected by it can have completely varying effects. Who is the author? Oh, okay. I will share the author of The Body Keeps Score. Oh, there you go. Thank you, Taylor.
Here's the book.
Thank you, Cindy. We even have a visual. Great book. I love it. And it's just a reminder, you know, that our experiences are so ingrained. Thank you, Cindy. They're just so ingrained on many different dimensions of the human experience. So I really think that that is something to just have handy. And when in doubt, you know, reach out to not just books and resources, but to this network of amazing people. As you see, Cindy just came through for us and showed us exactly what to look for. So thank you. And thank you all for sharing some of the other harmful myths that we can fall victims to, because as humans and as, thinkers, our mind is such a fascinating machine that it will create so many things and really provide distortions when sometimes we've been through difficult things, and it will try to protect us and shield us from harm and from conversations and comments and just sensations that might not be comfortable. But sometimes there is a lot of healing in the discomfort. There could be a lot of to gain from flushing out some of these things. So just to recap of a definition of what is trauma. So here is SAMHSA's definition of trauma, and it uses the 3 E's. And these 3 E's are very important to keep in mind, as we mentioned previously, that a individual trauma results from an event, a set of circumstances, and it's experienced by the individual. And these experiences can have physically, emotionally, psychologically, socially, and spiritual effects on that person and their perspective on who they are, what the world is like, what to expect from the world, what to expect from others, and what others expect from them. So remember that trauma can only really be fully understood from the person that experienced it, because it is that unique experience that really characterizes how severe and how long lasting the effects can be. So trauma through a child's eyes. When we consider what are some of the things, especially for children in the foster care system and systems in general, some of the things that we often see is that, there has been a threat to the life or physical integrity of the child or someone important to them. So again, we talk about the secondary trauma here, where it could have been a physical threat or a sense of danger for their parent, for their sibling, for someone in their immediate space. And it causes an overwhelming sense of terror, helplessness, and horror. When we experience trauma as human beings, there's an element of being out of control. Everything that happens during those moments of true terror, we find ourselves the most helpless. And therefore, part of the healing process, part of, a big part of being trauma and resilience informed is providing them that sense of empowerment back, providing them that sense of safety so that we can counterbalance some of the helplessness and some of the effects that they might have had during those moments. And trauma in that sense produces intense physical effects, such as pounding of the heart, rapid breathing, trembling, dizziness, loss of bladder or bowel movements. We often see that some of these effects can have it happen even while the child is not, in immediate risk or immediate danger. And we're going to talk a little about trauma reminders. And trauma reminders, just as though the trauma was happening or they were experiencing these moments or circumstances again, has the same effect on the body. Again, the body remembers, and the body sometimes, in connection with the brain, acts as this joint machine for the sense of survival. And survival instincts can look different for different people, and we're going to talk about that shortly. We also want to consider some of the types of trauma for children. So here, when we talk about intergenerational, ancestral trauma history, and many of our children in foster care system have multi-generational system involvement. So it's the cumulative effect of just being part of the system. There is often unaddressed and unresolved grief that we might see. We might not know about it, but we can definitely sense it and see it. There is a damage of cultural identity. Um, Depending on your zip code, your skin color, how you see your biological family, or how your bio family has been described to you, there's a damage in that child's identity. Because at the core, we all connect back to where we come from and who looks like us, and what we've been taught about who we are. Very underneath, sometimes truly unspoken, is the spiritual trauma. If we have a child who came from a family that shared different beliefs, different religions, different cultural identity, or routine traditions, the shift of home into a new and maybe something they don't understand can be very traumatizing and have a damaging impact on their spiritual identity. The distrust of services. A lot of the times this passed on trauma can happen by the stories that we tell. As many of you pointed out in the chat and during our discussing the myths, is that this is an adult problem. And often we have conversations that we might think are adult conversations in the presence of children. And we might think they don't understand. We are talking and they're not listening, but they're listening. They're listening. And a lot of the times when we are talking badly about the system, or talking badly about, things like that, we often can pass down these mistrust of services, mistrust of people. And again, we might in our everyday lives see daily reminders of some of the things that have happened to our past, to our past members, our bio family, our culture, our identity. When we think about history, we might see ourselves or our population, our culture identity identified as a certain way. So these are all things that really add to this historical and intergenerational part of trauma. And this is how it affects children. From the very beginning, we understand that children can come with a lot of unspoken trauma, and this can be one of them. We also understand that there is acute trauma, the meaning a one-time event. Acute does not mean that it has lesser effects. It just talks about the duration of it, meaning that it was a one-time, time-specific, something like a accident, an injury, witnessing or being victim of a crime, losing a loved one, surviving or overcoming a natural disaster, being a victim of physical or sexual assault. So all of these it could be a one-time event and can have long-lasting impact on ourself, on our children, and how they view their world. We also have to consider the impact of chronic trauma. And this is an ongoing, for a person that has experienced chronic trauma, it seems as though a condition that one could never get out of. It just seems never ending. And this is something like living in poverty, living in unsafe communities where violence is just the norm. Helicopters, are just the norm. A chronic illness of a loved one. It can be, something as such as cancer, something such as substance abuse, We can see that an ongoing chronic condition that is debilitating can have harmful effects on a child. Homelessness, feeling that you don't belong, feeling that you will always be on the streets, or that there is nothing more for you, can also be very challenging to overcome. Abuse or neglect, again, when we have a series of set circumstances that have been repetitive and continual, those have long lasting impacts. And for children, and here in the one-time event, we have physical and sexual assault, but we know that a lot of our children have ongoing things that was just not time limited, something that was pervasive and was ongoing, and that too can be part of chronic trauma because of its duration. We also consider complex. And this is probably the one most of you are most familiar with, whether you, have categorized it as so, or just, sometimes we know the trauma, we just don't have the words that, that have been, used to categorize them. And this is that complicated, where do I start type of situation. It is systemic, it could be institutional, it can be a lifelong battle, such as race, racism, sexism, all the phobias, community violence, medical trauma. And these are the types of trauma that stack up one on top of another. Let's say we have a child who comes from a multi-generational system-involved family who, through experiencing or being a victim of a crime, ended up in the DCFS system and has lived in an impoverished, unsafe neighborhood all their lives. And not only that, but they have also experienced high levels of violence through bullying. So we see how there can be a combination of all of these types of trauma. And when we put them all together, that is a complex, a complicated, complex level of trauma that can be very hard to discern how and where do we start. And we'll talk about how we start to peel off some of those things by understanding how these happen. So one of the things that sometimes might not be so popular, especially when we talk about the brain, but it's very important, because I think that if we had, like X-ray vision, and we can see what's happening in the brain of a child when we're talking to them, when we're trying to love on them, when we're trying to discipline them, and then we see kind of unexpected responses. If we could only see inside of their brain, maybe we can have a little bit more understanding of what's happening. And for that, we're going to go through the major parts of the brain. So Dr. Dan Siegel has developed this hand brain model that has been very helpful for me to kind of just keep the understanding of what it is that I'm dealing with. And it is also very helpful when you're working with adults, because you can imagine what could be happening in their brain. So Dr. Dan Siegel uses his hand to, represent our brain. So with this, he defines our brain stem, our reptilian brain, our instinctual brain, as being the base of our hand, of our palm. So consider our wrist and all below to be our brain stem. And this is the part of our brain that is on automatic function. So everyone right now is using their brain, because you're breathing, you're blinking, and you are still alive. So that part of their brain is making that happen very, systematically, without thinking about it. We don't have to put a timer and say to ourselves, blink, or, oh, don't forget to breathe. I mean, also sometimes we do, but so that is working on its own, and it doesn't need us to check up on it. The other part of the brain, demonstrated by our thumb, is our limbic system, our emotional feeling brain. This is where the memories are captured. This is where we have our hormones being created and delivered to the rest of our body. And this is where we have our amygdala. This is where we store things that are of emotional value and importance to us. And our four fingers, once we bring it over and cover our thumb, this represents our prefrontal cortex. And this is our rational thinking brain. This is the part that is in charge of our executive functioning. So us thinking through consequences, us thinking about right and wrong. And a fun fact is that this is a part of the brain that we use when we are joking, because we have to consider whether a joke is funny, whether it makes sense. So there's a lot of prefrontal cortex being utilized during the times of that. That's why jokes and things like that make the brain work a little bit more are very cool ways to connect all three parts of your brain. That's just a fun fact. I like having fun facts. So in combination, all of these work together to keep us thinking, to keep us alive, and to keep us making rational and also instinctual processes throughout our lives. And typically when we record things in our body or record things in our memory, typical functioning brains, let's consider what we're talking about here. We're talking about trauma and how it affects children. So we experience a scary event, something scary happens. We then send messages to our brain, to our limbic system, which is also in charge of our fight or flight, because this is where the magic happens. This is where our hormones, this is where our memories are feeling. So our amygdala releases chemicals to help our body respond to the potential threat. Am I going to run? Am I going to freeze? Am I going to fight? And this then becomes this part of our response to this frightening or scary thing, then becomes part of the thing that we create a memory of. So if we experience where we're walking down a trail and we experience a rattlesnake, well, first of all, we could, just by hearing it, we might already instinctually heighten our response, and we know, okay, at that moment we might freeze because we need to kind of assess where's the danger coming from. If we see it, then we might start to think, maybe I need to back up, we start to rationalize how we're going to respond. However, you don't need to meet the same snake twice to understand what you have to do. It's not like you're going to meet a snake in the road and then say the second time, be like, oh, well, last time I ran away, but nothing happened. Let me pet it this time. We usually, once we encountered something that frightened us, something that really caused us that emotional and physical response, this becomes ingrained. It becomes ingrained in our picture our brain kind of bridging together a pathway. So now every time that we're confronted with something that makes us feel similarly, we are going to now be able to respond more automatically. Not only that, but we become hypervigilant to what has happened in the past. So the changes brought on in the brain as a stress reaction are helpful to face immediate danger. However, when we are impacted by complex trauma, as we've described, a combination, layers and layers of possible traumatic experiences, harmful set of circumstances, we only need a trauma reminder. That means that we don't have to come across the actual thing that provided us that sensation of danger or harm. We only need something that slightly reminds us. So if you envision yourself on that same path and you see something that resembles that of a snake, You don't need to see the snake to, again, alert your brain. Your brain kicks into gear and you have this adverse reaction. And after you see, oh, it's not a snake, it's just a twig that looks like a snake. Our hippocampus, because it's been so accustomed to being on survival mode, has the potential risk of decreasing its ability to really respond to stimuli. So imagine a car. When you turn it on, you're ready to go. But if you turn it on and you leave it there, you might waste your gas, you might overheat it. So think about our brain as this machine that if we leave it on hyper gear, we leave it on, on always alert, as many of our children in the foster system are. They can become less, they can become less active when there is actual, other dangerous factors. That's why we see a lot of children that might be not reactive, or might not react in ways that we would think that would be a way to react to certain things and conditions, because having this abundance of just over and over and over experiences of trauma can have that debilitating impairment in our prefrontal cortex, and then become indiscriminate of fear. And we might see this in children who have been abused. And we often see that there is, a certain level of emotional detachment that might be pervasive in our experiences with interacting with them. So again, we ask not is what's wrong with them, but what has happened to them that would make their behavior completely rational and understandable. Because for any behavior, symptom, or sign that you see, there is a story behind it. We might not always know it, but if we can at least have that respectful, curious mind, we can provide that space. Again, it's all about creating space. So what happens ultimately in the brain, typically when we have a safe, stable, nurturing, upbringing, then our brain learns to function in the most typical way that is meant to, meaning that we are thinking and learning about our world and the people in it. When we are hungry or crying, need a change, we have that emotional and social support that's going to come and feed us and change us, which then helps us learn how to regulate. And we spend very little time on that survival focus of like, am I going to eat tomorrow? Am I going to be alive? Which are, not actual thoughts that a child might have, but the feeling is there. On the opposite side of what we would want to typically have children experience, on the opposite side, when a child has experienced developmental trauma or trauma in early age, is that a lot of their focus, a lot of their mental energy might have gone to survival. What's going to happen next? I need to, keep myself safe, my siblings safe. I need to, I cry, I don't get fed, I don't get changed. Then this leads to having to prioritize. Then how do I find ways to regulate? I can't cry always, I can't defend myself always. And then there's little time to develop that social and emotional connection with those around us, and very little time to learn about life and what's out there, because we are so stuck within ourselves, within our experience, because there is a constant threat of survival. So when we keep these things in mind, we can actually, without knowing or without being able to see through people's, an X-ray vision of their brain, we can start to make those respectful assumptions that maybe they didn't have the time to develop this social emotional connection. And as a loving, caring individual, Sometimes it's our relationship, our corrective relationships that will allow for those experiences to enhance these aspects of the brain that might not have had the chance to develop in early age. We also want to be mindful of how children respond to trauma. And I've mentioned a few ways throughout the presentation, but I really want to focus now on some of the things that we might often see. And this is, long-term trauma can interfere with that healthy development and affect in children. Therefore, you might see that it's, they might have a difficult time learning to trust. They might not know how to trust. They have a sense of personal, safety. They might be preoccupied with just their surroundings, the people around them. You might see very extreme levels of emotional responses or a flat affect. Again, you might see extremes because of this inability to manage emotions. The ability to navigate adjustments in a life. Constant change is not comfortable for anyone. And if you consider your own experience during this past historically challenging year, think about all the adjustments you had to do. And it might have felt very strange and uncomfortable. And many times we grow accustomed to it if it's a stable and routine type of change. But when there is constant change, there is constant sense of adjusting. And that adjustment period, it does not feel comfortable. It is not the best feeling. So, many of our children have experienced just multiple homes, multiple challenges, rejections, even shame. So every experience, every interaction has a potential to leave long-lasting impact in our children's view of the world and themselves. And the responses, their physical and emotional responses to stress can be different. Again, we see the way in which the brain characterizes fear and danger and how it responds to it. But again, the constant sense of being hypervigilant can provide that deterioration and discrimination of fear. So therefore, that's why we see different children respond differently to similar stimuli, to similar events and things, and sometimes very, very different. And it's all part of that unique experience. So sometimes we might see the hyperarousal, the nervousness, the jumpiness, the quick to get back, quick responses, smart comments. Sometimes they even come across as defiant. They might have difficulties focusing, difficulties learning. And again, remember the brain, and how if their triangle has been inverted from a typical developmental brain to a trauma impacted brain, we can completely understand how children that have experienced trauma might have difficulty learning. And it's not that they don't have the ability or the intellectual capacity. It's just that sometimes when you are in hyper vigilant mode, the brain is going to take some time to develop those pathways of learning, because a learning brain is a brain that needs safety. It needs stability. It needs that space to explore. We might see those reminders, those daily reminders, or sometimes the re-experiencing of things from the past that can have a significant physiological impact in the children. And they may come through as things that we cannot even detect, such as intrusive thoughts and intrusive images, sensations, their dreams. And this, again, is not something that we as, caregivers, providers, just loving adults can see or can detect. However, if we are mindful of just the signs and symptoms, the body language that we see, we can at least provide again that space. There's no need to fixing again. I'm going to repeat that no one needs fixing. We just need that space for healing. And it looks different for different people. That's why the space for them and for you to kind of explore what that looks like for your child, for yourself, is very important. We might also see the avoidance in the withdrawal. And we see this most typically in our adolescents. And you know, it's that feeling numb, shutting down, separate from normal life, pulling away from activities and relationships. Now, mind you that many of these traits are typical adolescent response, because during adolescence is a very unique time where we are exploring our identity, we are pushing our limits, we are finding our sense of self. We want to be autonomous, we want to be independent. But again, we have to be very respectfully curious to be able to determine, is this typical adolescent behavior, or is it a sign of something more? And again, we do so by allowing that space for communication. And we're going to get to how do we communicate effectively. And avoiding things from the past can also be a way in which we try to avoid. We don't want to go back to that restaurant. We don't want to go back to that street. We don't want to see this person anymore, because a lot of the times people, places, and things hold a lot of, you know, a lot of significant importance, especially when they remind us of things that are uncomfortable to re-experience and think about. And this brings us to our trauma reminders, that they can be an unconscious connection for you and for your child. But there can be events, sounds, things, smells that can really bring on these trauma reminders. And all we can do is be there, be an open space for of acceptance, of understanding, of, you know, of safety, so that we can explore what these are, and then how do we respond appropriately. Another thing, especially with younger children, we want to be very intentional of when they have a time to play, we want to be able to see how they play. When playing, young children have often, that have often gone through traumatic experiences, may repeat all or part of their traumatic experiences. You might see it in how they play with their toys or their dolls, or with each other, the roles they take on when in play. They might try also, this fantasy playing to try out different outcomes. But, there's a lot of things that we can learn by observing, just being, just being the witness of the evolution of these children. They might get stuck in a particular moment or event, and they might resist you changing an outcome. Many times we might see children that are playing a certain way, and we might try to gently redirect them, and they might have a strong reaction to that. And again, we have to be mindful of what can be happening under the surface, what is happening in the brain that I might not be fully attuned to. And when we do see some of these trauma reminders spark up, we want to make a note of it. We want to, be like, when did this happen? Where did it happen? What happened? How did they react? How did this thing that might not or might be connected to something that you can puzzle together, or something that just kind of make no sense to you at the moment, but keep a record of like, okay, this is, so that we can learn how to reduce or avoid exposure to things that might be trauma reminders, and share these observations with your team. with the people that are supporting you and supporting, the child through this, again, through this evolution, through this transition um, of their life. And we want to focus on the fact that recovery from trauma is absolutely possible. Resilience is inherent in all of us. We all have the capacity and the ability to overcome traumatic experiences, challenges, and we help children feel and enhance their resilience by providing them with this sense of safety, this empowerment that yes, they can. And of course, always always reminding them that they are lovable, that they are special, that they matter. And we see that in resilient children. These are some of the top 3 characteristics that we see in children when they feel safe, when they feel empowered, and when they feel loved for just being who they are. We can definitely open the floodwaters to all the possibilities that come from that inherent resilience. And some of the factors that increase resilience is having that strong relationship with at least one person. One person can make the difference of, life and death. One person that matters and that you matter to can be the difference that you need in this world. Feeling connected to a positive role model, mentor, again, someone that you can count on, someone that no matter what, you can lean on. Having talents and abilities nurtured, again, focusing on what is strong in them, what is unique about them, what makes them who they are. And that's one of the, unique things about being strength-based. Feeling some control over their lives. Again, helplessness is part of trauma. Empowerment and a sense of control is part of healing. So when we can provide choices, when we can provide collaboration, empowerment, let's take every opportunity to provide that. And having that sense of belonging to a community, a group, it's something greater than oneself. When we have this sense of like, wow, I matter, I'm gonna make a difference, I am part of this group or sense of family, it's such a tremendous, powerful impact that can have long lasting, effects in a child's life. And essential things for resilience is communication and problem skills, problem solving skills. We have to, as nurturers, as the adults in the room, we really have to be on our A game when it comes to having that knowledge to be present, be safe, be supportive. We have to learn how to effectively understand ourselves and how we regulate. We want to provide that positive view of ourselves because, again, children might not often talk to us, especially adolescents, but they are paying attention. They are looking to what we say and what we do, and that's why it matters. In realistic planning, we never want to set up a child to fail. We want to be realistic in the things that we can see achievable. We want to have, goals that are attainable, because when we have goals that are unattainable, that can really provide a sense of suffering for the self-esteem and the ability to think that we are capable of things. So keeping things in contact can really be something that is powerful. So now we're going to move into the action part of our training. And again, this is for you. So if you need to take a stretch break, if you need water, do what you need. We are going to provide a time for a breakout room. So this is the time where we get to talk to one another. And again, if you are doing 1,001 things, and you can use this time to take care of yourself or attend to something else, just let your partners know in the breakout room, and do what's best for you. So we're going to go ahead and break out into rooms, and these are the prompts. Consider the effects of the trauma that we've talked about. Discuss communication strategies that have been effective for you with connecting with your child. And we will come back and share some of those before we finish off with some of the skills that we hope will enhance what is already working for you. So I will say this, I'll read them in Spanish now. Primero, considera los efectos de trauma que hemos discutido, y segundo, discutan estrategias de comunicación que han sido efectivas en su conexión con su hijo o hija. Y estén preparados para compartir una de sus estrategias cuando regresemos. Al mismo tiempo, si necesita este tiempo para hacer cualquier otra cosa o nomás necesita un poquito de tiempo, tome el tiempo y úselo como le sirva a usted. So with that, we're going to go into our breakout rooms, and we will be back in 15 minutes. Well, no, we'll be back in 10 minutes because
Hi, sorry, I was thrown into a breakout room, but I had to add like a privacy thing. Is it possible to be put back into a breakout room?
yes, definitely. Let me see if I
Francis, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I can put you in a room, no problem. Thanks, Francis.
Thanks so much.
So welcome back. Welcome back. Okay, we're almost all back. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you, Bob. Okay, I think we have most of our people back in the room. So in the chat, I just want people to share what are some of the effective strategies that they talked about, and just what no worries if your computer or internet is acting up. This is being recorded, and you will have access to the slides as well. I'm glad to hear that, Elizabeth. And I hope it was enough time. As again, if you've been with me for more than one training, you know I get carried away and we end up oh, sorry, Angel. Hopefully that allowed you some you time. Okay, so in the chat, any strategies that stand out, anything that has been effective, or you just like to share that has been good for you? Letting kids take the lead, communication, being consistent, following through with what you say, being honest and upfront. Yeah, thank you. Giving them choice. Yeah, and please feel free to continue to share as we move along through the last part of our session, which is how do we provide that space? I've been talking about this space of safety and connection, which really lends to a sensitive communication type of skill. And again, it is encompassing safety, space for regulation, and connection, which are the three pillars of really providing a space for establishing that trust and that relationship. And providing safety happens through relationships. As many of you pointed out in the chat, they will not often listen to what you say, but they are paying attention to what you do and acknowledging verbally, letting them know that, children, everyone is entitled to feel emotionally, physically, and culturally safe, to be who they are, to be their best self. Again, like being mindful of the trauma reminders, we want to familiarize ourselves with with the comforts of our children, with their boundaries, with how they place them, their love language, how do they express their needs, and be always mindful of prioritizing and assuring them that they are safe, that they're cared for, and having the space to regulate. The impact of children will affect us whether we want to or not, whether we are superhumans and have been doing this for years. It will impact us. There will be a day where we're running low on our fuel, and it will have an impact on us. So therefore, modeling the way that we regulate, naming our emotions. Dan Siegel has developed a series of research studies in which he has shown that when you name it, you could tame it. So if you can put words to your feelings and emotions, you can then allow your brain that moment of understanding to produce those calming effects that then trickle down to your body. And this is a practice. It's not a super a super one-time thing that you do and then you will always be regulated. It is a practice that we have to do every time that we are in the need for regulation. And connection happens, just as many of you have shared, when you validate your child's experiences, their emotions, when you collaborate with how to address the need. Sometimes we might think that we know what's best for them, but you'll be surprised with their own ideas of what they might feel is best for them. Even when it comes to consequences, as my bio was discussed earlier, restorative practices is big on this, and restorative practices is about repairing harm. So when we talk about consequences, a child is much more likely, child or adolescent, hey, even an adult, much more likely to follow through with the consequences when they have been part of creating what the consequences are. And we want to, encompass, how do we do this? Okay, we're caring, we're loving, we're kind, but how do we create the space? Well, I want you to remember calmer. We need to be calm. We need to be in the zone to be there for anyone else. So I want you to remember this acronym. And calmer stands for check in with yourself, active listen, make a caring statement, and reinforce resilience. So with checking in with yourself, you have to remember that you got this. You too embody resilience. You are a model. You are a corrective relationship, a collective experience for this child. It's helpful to take a moment and pause and support yourself. Ask yourself, what do I need? Ask yourself, am I ready for this conversation? Am I in the headspace, in the physical, emotional, and spiritual space to open and create the space authentically and genuinely for this child? Center yourself, because it's crucial. The kids are so good at taking on vibes, social cues, You know, you might not say things, but your body language might tell you away if you're uncomfortable, if you are not feeling your best self. So remember, you have to be there for yourself, center yourself, know that you got this, take care of you. We also want to listen actively. You know, active listening is not just repeating what they're saying, but repeating what you are hearing them say. It allows for them to take a lead on the conversation, as some of you pointed out is an effective communication technique for you. It builds rapport, and it allows the child to feel heard, to feel seen, to feel understood, and to know that what they're saying matters to you. And it also allows them an opportunity to correct you if your interpretation of what they're saying is wrong. And that is one of the things when we empower children to speak for themselves and to be the narrators of their story, they will, when given an opportunity, provide you with, you know, more clarity and more clarification when something they said was mistaken, misunderstood. And we want to be, you know, always genuine when we express feelings and display warmth, because again, you know, something happens to us when we go through a lot of trauma and a lot of challenging experience. We become really attuned to knowing when someone is just saying something. So we want to be always authentic. We also want to make a caring statement. When children and young adults open their stories to us, that takes a lot of effort, especially when they have gone through challenging experiences, through broken relationships. So we want to acknowledge that, you know, I can see that this was really hard for you, and yet you're still trusting me with it. And, you know, provide that sense of comfort that I hear you. I don't, you know, I don't know what everything you've been through, but I am definitely here and I definitely care. And it helps, you know, it helps to be present in those challenging moments, because you, by modeling these caring and sensitive skills of communication, allow the child to regulate and to better be able to take control of their narrative. And we want to take the time to normalize that based on everything you've been through, is, you know, it's totally understandable that you would feel that way, that you would, you know, look at the world that way. And always reinforce that, you know, you got something special, because every single one of us has something unique to ourselves. We want to be able to reflect the strengths that we see in them, because we as individuals might not always see what's the best in us, but when we have a witness, when we have someone that is paying attention to us, they can probably see it more clearly. One thing that I want you to remember is change your expectations into appreciations, because when a child opens up to you, when a child is, you know, willing to be in a conversation with an adult, it has to be something appreciated. Because again, many feel misunderstood, many feel that we are not going to get it. So we really want to be like, whoa, you know what? Thanks for having that chat with me. And again, not an expectation, but an appreciation. And openly discuss coping skills that has worked for you and work for them. You know, when I'm having a bad day, what really helps me is that sometimes I just want to watch an episode of Miraculous Ladybug. If you have any children, you probably know what the show is. I love Miraculous Ladybug, and it always gives me that sense of like peace. And that's one of the shows that I can watch when my daughter, and, you know, reset my whole feel. And all the things that we talked about today, I really want you to just incorporate everything that you already know works for you, everything that you have learned that has enhanced, hopefully, your understanding. And remember to calmer, check in, listen actively, make a caring statement, reinforce resilience. And I will close us out with my favorite, Dr. Maya Angelou. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. And I hope you have a great rest of your day and a lovely, safe weekend.
There's an African American song, 19th century. which is so great. It says, when it looked like the sun wasn't gonna shine anymore, God put a rainbow in the clouds. Imagine. And I've had so many rainbows in my clouds. I had a lot of clouds, but I have had so many rainbows. And one of the things I do when I step up on a stage, when I stand up to translate, when I go to teach my classes, when I go to direct a movie, I bring everyone who has ever been kind to me with me. Black, white, Asian, Spanish-speaking, Native American, gay, straight, everybody. I say, come with me. I'm going on the stage. Come with me, I need you now. Long dead, you see? So I don't ever feel I have no help. I've had rainbows in my clouds. And the thing to do, it seems to me, is to prepare yourself so that you can be a rainbow in somebody else's cloud. Somebody who may not look like you, may not call God the same name you call God, if they call God at all, you see? And may not eat the same dishes prepared the way you do, may not dance your dances or speak your language, but be a blessing to somebody. That's what I think. There's a
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for staying the extra time, and can't wait to see you again next month.